Good evening from UN headquarters in New York. I'm Tony Maciulis, Global Chief Content Officer of GZERO Media. Welcome to Live from the United Nations, Rethink, Reset, and Deliver Better with Data and AI, produced by the Complex Risk Analytics Fund. We'll call it CRAFT from this point on, right? We'll be joined over the next hour by UN leaders, partners, and of course, all of you watching this live stream at home. And by the way, there's a studio audience here too, which is very exciting for me. Last year, by the way, we had more than 2 million viewers live and on VOD. Not too shabby, okay? Yeah, thanks. I'd like to offer a special thank you to our co-hosts and partners, to everyone here in the Goals Lounge. It's beautiful, actually. As the UN marks its 80th birthday, the world faces overlapping shocks, from conflict to climate, from economic instability to the erosion of trust in institutions. The humanitarian system is under exceptional strain right now. Billions of dollars in aid have evaporated. That means millions of people are simply not being reached. But this is also a moment where a rethinking, a better use of technology could lead to faster and smarter action. So we're going to talk about what we've heard and learned so far this week, and what a week it's been, and how the UN 80 Reform Initiative could change the way this institution does business globally. And so to do that, I'm going to call up some very special guests. We have Ryder, Undersecretary General for Policy of the United Nations, Tom Fletcher, Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator, and Ugo Daniels, Deputy Director of IOM, UN Migration. Come on up. Yeah. Great, good to see you. Yes, yes. Good to see you. Good to see you. Yes. I've seen actually most of you over the course of this week. You've been everywhere, and I guess as have I, right? But let's start by just talking about the week a little bit, Guy. We've heard from presidents, we've heard from advocates, we've heard from delegates. What do you think defines the mood so far at UNGA?
I tell you, with 193 member states coming with very different opinions sometimes, it's quite difficult to sort of pick out a common theme, but I'm going to say perhaps a couple of things stood out to me. Firstly, notwithstanding the divisions, the disagreements, sometimes the cacophony of views out there, just the fact of all of these leaders being here and the activists and the advocates, I think the message that came through, stronger than anything else, is that whatever the shortfalls, and they're there, whatever the obstacles that we haven't been able to overcome, and there are plenty, we need this place, we need the United Nations, and people come here to talk these things out, and that multilateralism is not an option really for us, it's an absolutely essential element of our international community. That's not to say everything is perfect, because I think along with that realization of the necessity of multilateralism goes a very sharp realization that we do have to up our game collectively. When I say we, yes, the system itself, but also member states. They've really got to overcome differences with, I think, a great deal more determination than sometimes has been on display in recent years, in recent times.
And I want to talk a bit about the UN 80 Reform Initiative, which of course you're leading. But first, Tom, we know 80 years ago, the reason why the UN was founded, it was really born out of the ashes of World War II with a mission of keeping the peace and ensuring that a war like that never happens again. But right now, there are wars that are still raging in Gaza, in Ukraine, in Sudan, and beyond. What do you say to critics who say the UN has lost its way on a core principle?
I disagree with them. And I think this week, as Guy has explained, has really demonstrated that, because when you do strip back all the noise and the drama and the theatre and the excitement, and there's a lot of excitement, and that's a great thing, and the energy and the disagreement, the loud argument is part of diplomacy. But when the dust settles, I think people will think that this actually has been a really significant week of peacemaking. And to where you started, the UN wasn't built for good times, it was built for difficult times, and for a moment when you really need not just to be settling conflicts and saving lives, as we're trying to do on the humanitarian side, but also thinking about the future, and I know we'll come on to that. But on several practical peacemaking dossiers, I think we are in better shape. Where are we now? Day 57 of the week, I think, just about, than we were on Monday. And I hope that's the case. I'm conscious it's dangerous making predictions, but I'd say on Gaza, on Ukraine, and on Sudan, I'm in a more optimistic place than I was 4 days ago. And that's because of diplomacy and because of this high-level week.
You know, and I think there's no question that the march to the majority of your member states is happening on some of those issues, but you have some very key standouts who happen to be, one of them at least, a big member of the Security Council. So in what ways then do you see progress on something like Gaza from this week?
Because of the practical conversations we're having behind the scenes. And I think it's why we'd say, aim off a little bit for the outward-facing drama of the week. We've been in many meetings with the Secretary General in the last few days, and they have been very, very practical meetings around these crises. And of course, he had a very practical meeting with President Trump, who I think you're probably hinting at there, about peacemaking and about the president's focus on ending some conflicts. And no one cares more about ending conflicts than the UN Secretary General. So there's real common ground there. And I think that's percolating through the conversations more broadly. Mm-hmm. We're finding a lot of people coming here and saying, okay, let's put our differences aside and try and find ways to end these long-running conflicts which are having such a massive humanitarian impact.
That's a perfect segue to Ugo, of course, because those conflicts have also created exponentially greater numbers of migrants, whether they're displaced within their countries or they have left for other places. And I see a double-edged problem right now of A, lack of funding and resources, and B, lack of political will. In fact, migrants are often used as political pawns, as we heard during President Trump's speech on Tuesday. How is that impacting the work of your organization?
So let's, first of all, look at this from a balancing the narrative perspective. 90% of all migration that occurs around the world is regular. About 10% is irregular. However, the politicization of it is 90% of what we hear. So migrants, 304 million of them around the world, are positively contributing to global socioeconomic prosperity. But what the challenge is for the 10% that it is irregular and for those that are displaced is that we see humanitarian needs increasing, people being forced to move in greater numbers, and at the same time, securitization of borders, countries looking inward. And what it means is that it's much harder in terms of the international cooperation that is needed to deal with an issue that requires countries to come together and solve it. But having said all of that, for an organization like IOM, we're very, very solutions focused, and solutions that work for the countries migrants come from, the countries that they go to, as well as for the migrants themselves. And lastly, when it comes to those who are displaced within their countries, what this, the current political climate means is that we need to work with the governments, with the communities, for them to really own the solutions that will resolve displacement. Because we know if we continue to provide humanitarian assistance, we will continue to need to provide humanitarian assistance and not get to solutions. So we're solutions focused.
Yeah, we're going to talk about some local solutions actually a little later in the program with a second panel. But before we move off of this topic and into the future and talk about reform and AI, which I know is a big theme today here at the UN General Assembly, Tom, I want to mention, we both were part of an event this week that focused on mental health in humanitarian situations. And I feel like it often gets certainly under-discussed and woefully underfunded. Why do you think it's important to keep that, as Amina Mohammed, the DSG, has said, put the head back on the body when we're in humanitarian situations?
Absolutely urgent. And I've seen, as I've seen from Myanmar to Haiti to the DRC to Afghanistan. Actually, a lot of our life-saving work is about providing that psychosocial support, often to victims of violence, often to victims of extreme gender-based violence, where you really need to get those interventions within the first 48 hours after the attacks. So everywhere I go, you feel that trauma in the communities. You feel it particularly somewhere like Gaza, where just about, I would say, all of our staff in different ways are experiencing extreme trauma. So for the communities we serve, it's massive. It's also massive for the humanitarian sector as a whole. And it's a combination of us being overstretched and under-resourced and literally under attack wherever we work, that humanitarians through the system, whether you're a UN worker or working for an NGO, passionate people who will work and work and work as hard as they can, but there is massive burnout through the sector. And there is a sense of anger, because last year was the deadliest year ever to be a humanitarian worker. We lost more of our colleagues than any other year ever. And we're experiencing that. We're calling the families of our colleagues and they're saying, well, will there be justice? Will there be protection? Will there be accountability? And we don't think there is. So a large cause of the burnout is that disconnect between the values that people feel and the value of the work they're doing, and that sense that somehow they're not protected. So this is a huge priority for us right now.
So, Guy, this is not the first time reform has been attempted or discussed within these walls, and I'm just sort of curious, what do you think makes this moment different, and how are you going to approach it differently?
Yeah, I think, it's important to recognize that no reform process has a guarantee of success from the outset. You've got to make it work. You've got to work at it. By the way, by the same token, no reform process, no matter what the past record has been, is condemned to failure either. So, what are our current circumstances? I think, firstly, and it's come out, I think, very strongly this week, and I agree with what Tom said about this week, the progress that we've made. There is a feeling from member states, but also from colleagues in the system, that standing still is not an option, that multilateralism is under pressure, and if we are honest and look at ourselves in the mirror, we know we've got to move forward and do things differently. Mm-hmm. So the push to change is shared by colleagues and member states, and I think it's, at least in my experience, I haven't seen it quite like that previously. But then, on the other side of the equation, you've got to have an idea where you're going. You can't just sort of launch into a let's do something differently, a sort of conversation, without an idea of what you're trying to do. And I think already in the UN80 initiative, we've got a budget going to be discussed throughout the rest of this year, and it's a tough budget. Nobody loves cutting a budget by 15%, which is what we're doing at the Secretariat, and losing posts on the way. We're doing it. It's a tough one, but we're doing it. We've done, I think, a pretty good job of looking at all of the mandates we've accumulated over the years, which define how this place works day in, day out. And we're really offering ourselves the chance to do our job differently. Mm-hmm. And just last week, the Secretary General put, I think, a fairly far-reaching report on the table about structural changes. What was interesting about that report is that it's the result of, at least in my experience, again, an unprecedented effort of consultation. The whole system joined in. Tom led a major consultation around humanitarian space. We've done the same on development. We've done the same on peace and security. So there's a feeling of momentum, both because of need, but also of the way we're organizing ourselves to move forward to a destination that we've got a pretty clear idea of what it's going to be.
And the Secretary General has been so optimistic about a future that includes AI and data as a huge part of the work of the UN. Ugo, from your perspective, how is data already transforming your work? And what more can and should be done? And I'll ask Tom the same question as we wrap up.
So maybe two things in the interest of time. So the first is that for a long, long time, for those who are displaced in humanitarian situations, there's been a real focus on when does displacement end? And yet we know that we cannot, as I mentioned, we can't continue with humanitarian response. We need to get to solutions. And what data has shown us is to flip that perspective from when does displacement to end to where do solutions start. And long-term solutions livelihoods, land tenure, housing, access to basic services, which are not your classical humanitarian interventions, but equally important to invest in these right from the beginning if we're going to have long-term solutions. And that's what the data in the periodic global report on the state of solutions has shown us over the past 3 years. That's transformational. The second piece I'll speak about is the IOM, WFP, UNICEF, UNHCR on a data collaborative. I mean, one of the largest Gordian knots that we've had to deal with is the interoperability of data, as unsexy as that sounds, but it's a huge obstacle. AI enables us to leapfrog that. AI enables us to look at massive data sets that to us don't speak to each other, but AI can analyze, can identify patterns, and we can not just respond now, but we can anticipate, we can forecast, we can prevent, which is really getting to anticipatory action and actual prevention of humanitarian needs.
And Tom, final word, AI and data can be very useful, as was heard from Ugo. Of course, they don't build you a house, they don't feed you.
Absolutely.
So just quickly on the notion of the balance between human and humanitarian work and technology, as you see it.
It's a big challenge, and somewhere if you Google hard enough, you'll find a report I wrote in 2017 for the SG on exactly that question, but I'll give you the 30-second version instead.
No problem.
First, and I'll do something Guy hates, which is to give him credit, because he did the heavy lifting on UN 80 with the SG, and the story could have been, and maybe some people thought a month ago it would have been, this isn't an ambitious enough set of proposals, but that's not what I've been hearing this week. I've been hearing member states coming in hard behind it. As Ugochi says, anticipatory action, forecasting the crises of the future. Now that is a real sweet spot for technology and AI. But also, I think you can shrink the distance between the person who needs help and the person giving the help, maybe without all of our layers in between. But we're not so far from imagining a situation where, we're dealing today with a situation in Al Fasher where a mother in Al Fasher picks up a phone, she's connected, she can get support directly, she can have the dignity and the power to tell us what she needs, and then we work with the supply chains and the other supporters beyond classic donors and states, but with tech companies, with businesses, with individuals, to make sure that she then gets that support. We're not that far away from that. We should be able to imagine the renewal of how we do this work.
Tom Fletcher, Ugo Daniels, Guy Ryder, I know how busy you are. I'm going to let you get back to your work. Thank you so much. Give them a round of applause, please. And coming up next, more on how advances in data analytics and AI are already changing the game on the ground in humanitarian situations. But first, we have a special message here for you from UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. Take a look.
We are facing a global crisis. Conflicts are multiplying in the context in which geopolitical divides do not allow to effectively address them, and technological developments are largely without guardrails, and of course they have an enormous potential, but the risks are there, and some of the risks can be witnessed today. So in this context, we absolutely need leaders to come here and to turn the tides, to come here and understand that international cooperation is vital in a moment like this, to come here and to accept some forms, which of course are soft, but some forms of governance of artificial intelligence and new technologies that make sure that human agency is preserved and that they become a force for good. And essentially to come here and to reaffirm multilateralism, that we cannot solve all these problems alone, because we absolutely need to preserve human agency in artificial intelligence, to guarantee that artificial intelligence is an enormous contribution to the Sustainable Development Goals, to more equality in the world, to multiply the limited resources that we have available in order to be able to help countries be successful and in providing to their people a response to their needs, especially in education, in health, in housing, and in many other aspects that are essential for the well-being of populations. The UN today is a constellation of organizations. If we would build the UN today with all its agencies, we will build it differently. And we need to do, on one hand, to make sure that there is no waste, to make sure that there is no duplication in the use of resources, to make sure that the organizations are more slim and more effective, and to make sure that they come together to reduce their costs, effectively organizing the United Nations in a way in which everything is used to the benefit of the people we care for. Because today the world is only one, and what happens in any part of the world will have an effect in our own lives. Look at the demography and the movements of people. This is indeed one world. Our house is our world, and the problems anywhere in the world are our problems. I usually use a sentence of Jean Monnet, which is, I'm not optimistic nor pessimistic, I'm determined. I think this is a moment in which we need determination. Sometimes it looks there is no hope. We must build that hope, and we must be determined, never giving up, and fighting until our objectives can be achieved.
And welcome back. We're live inside the UN headquarters in New York during this 80th General Assembly and talking about the power of data and AI as tools to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And I've got, you just heard, of course, from Secretary General Antonio Guterres, conflicts are multiplying, geopolitical divides are blocking solutions, and technology is racing ahead without guardrails. His ask is clear: protect human agency in AI, rebuild cooperation, and cut duplication so that resources reach people and not a pile of paperwork. Inside the House, that means, of course, a tightening of the system and stopping waste so that every dollar serves those in need. So how does the UN respond? And what could meaningful partnerships do to further that cause? These are the perfect people to talk to about that. I've got Gunn Urid, Director General of the Norwegian Agency for Development Corporation, NORAD, Dr. Comfort Arrow, it's so great to see you again, President and CEO of the International Crisis Group, and Dr. Ahmed Agwel, CEO and President of Village Reach, former head, I should say, of the African Centers for Disease Control. Welcome to you all. So, Comfort, I want to start with you because we've talked about this before, and unfortunately it's still the truth that there's unprecedented levels of violence and conflict out there in the world. And, you know, I sort of wonder whether you think the international system has the capacity to resolve these conflicts at this point, or are we just in kind of a management of crisis mode?
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your question, but also to Kraft for enabling this kind of work, and congratulations on your appointment as well to NORAD.
Yes, congrats.
So we should acknowledge that as well. You know, I've come to the conclusion that as much as we sort of despair about sort of the current times, and the picture's pretty bleak. You know, whether you look at the numbers, the casualty numbers coming out from whether it's Gaza or Ukraine, whether it's Myanmar, which hardly gets talked about, or Haiti as well. In the end, no matter which way you square it, you're still going to need some kind of body to help tackle these crises as well. And that classic undergraduate question, you know, if the UN didn't exist, if a multilateral entity didn't exist, would you create it? Yes, because somebody needs to pick up the pieces. States will always do what states do, and it's about power, it's about might over right, it's about the interests of states. But somebody has to care, has to worry about the violence, about the civilian protection. Somebody has to get the water, the food. Somebody has to provide the safety net as well. So the numbers are pretty stark. 65 in crisis groups lifetime. You know, we've been. This is our 30th anniversary. We were born out of a war in Europe, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. So you know, you're having a sort of a Sarajevo to Kyiv to Gaza moment. It's not a good story. It's a pretty bleak picture. And in 2024 alone, 62 conflicts around the world. And who, in the end, is at the front line? It's humanitarian agencies. It's an international humanitarian firefighters who are out there doing the work. It's local NGOs who are providing emergency relief, and they all need an infrastructure that can help them in that delivery as well. So it's a bleak picture. It's not going to get any better. We're going to see more civilian casualties. We're going to see more warfare. I worry about things like miscalculation, miscommunication, nuclear proliferation as well. But what is very clear to me is that whichever way you square the circle, you're going to need some form of crisis management body, some kind of institution to do the work and to speak up on behalf of countless civilians who are caught in the crossfire of all of this as well. And whether it's the UN, and with all its faults, nobody's collapsing it. And we heard this week that you have potential, the UN has potential, but there's also recognition that the House has to be reformed. And we can discuss how that looks like. But for me, I walk away with that conclusion. Despite how dark the situation is today, I walk away that you do need some kind of institution to carry that burden that states cannot do on behalf of victims around the world as well.
And Dr. Ogwell, we've been talking quite a bit in this program about the battles that are currently being fought, but then there are the ones still to come that we can't predict, and they could be public health crises like we saw with the pandemic. And I'm just sort of curious, that was also a moment where, and I remember having those conversations 2020 during the virtual UNGA, this is a moment of global cooperation. We're all going to come together, vaccines will make it to every corner of the world that needs them. That didn't happen. I'm just sort of curious from your perspective, from a public health perspective, what you see the role of multilateralism is and what more can be done, lessons learned from the COVID pandemic.
The most powerful part of multilateralism is to ensure that we prepare before the crisis comes. When it is time for a crisis, you don't think, you act. And when you act, you want to be sure that the path you're taking is one that was thought through in advance. And I think that's where the lessons of COVID have not been taken up properly. We learned painful lessons, but we're not carrying them into the season when there is no crisis. We are not planning for the season when, and the pandemic is coming relatively sooner than the 100 years that we saw the last one. Second is neighbors support neighbors. And this is true during a crisis and when there is no crisis. If neighbors are not coming together, then whatever it is going to spread. When neighbors come together, then whatever it is easier to contain. It doesn't matter how wealthy the neighbor is, it has to be a neighbor that is going to actually help the next neighbor to be able to address. And finally, seeing the challenges that multilateralism is facing now is a clear sign that the vehicle needs a little bit of fixing. Not throwing it away, because making another vehicle is going to take a huge amount of effort. Now that fixing is also preparing for the next crisis so that we have a vehicle that is well designed for a crisis that will come into the future. Neighborliness, sharing, this is what is going to get us out of the current crisis that we have.
And good. Norway obviously is seen as a leader in development aid, but as budgets are constrained and nationalism, frankly, is growing, how do you view the work that you're doing through this lens of the current moment of multilateralism?
Well, I think first of all, Norway already from the outset has been very supportive of the Secretary General's initiative on the UN80, and I think through all the speaking points, almost the main task then is for the UN to deliver impact on the ground and for the people affected. And I think we see that there is almost no other alternatives than to get this reform on track, to say it that. And I think we would like to do whatever we can with our support to look at how we can, with practical and political support, guide this process through. And I think for us in NORAD, then, who manage more or less the entire Norwegian development assistance budget, We are looking at data and statistics and to look at how is the Norwegian support looking 1 year down the road, 2 years down the road, where is the room to maneuver so that we have funds who are also available then to come in and support whatever the member states agree on as a result of this. And and the level of ambition has to be high for concrete deliverables. Yeah.
So, obviously we're talking about data and analytics as well. This is a craft event after all. So Dr. Ogwell, because I know you're a little tight on time, but I want to come to you again, talking about a bit about Village Reach and the work that you do. In what ways do you see AI as a tool if it gets into enough hands?
Data needs to be collected first for AI to start functioning properly. And we work at the community level and we see the value of data. Two very important things that sometimes are left out is when the data has been collected from the community is not given feedback on their own data. And we hear averages at the national, continental, even global level. But then the community from where the data has been extracted, and this is what we do, we ensure they get their feedback of what that data looks like and how it can be used to improve things at the community level. Second is when you're extracting data, you need to ensure that that data is being used to improve either the system that delivers, in our case, healthcare, or it improves the actual method that you use to deliver the healthcare. I'll give you an example. In the DRC, we went into a riverine community where you can only reach by river. And we were tasked to immunize children who had never been immunized before, the zero-dose children. But you don't walk in and start jabbing children. You walk in and start engaging with the communities. And they understood the reason why it was important for the children to be immunized. By the second week, they were ready for that immunization. Today, there's no polio in that community. But the bigger effect is that when our teams go back with any proposal, then they are received a lot more easily than it was before. Use the data, make sure that the community gets the benefit of it first before it comes into national and global averages. Working right at the grassroots level, it's the only way that you gain the trust because they see its value in their daily lives.
And Comfort, technology, as we've seen so many times, is a weapon, can be a weapon, and it augments kinetic warfare, autonomous drones, et cetera, but it could also be a tool. In what ways do you see data and technology right now as a positive in trying to bring peace?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think all these tools, because I think that's where you're hinting at, have a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
And I think there's a negative, but you're right to put a spotlight on the positive. Crisis Group is a conflict prevention organization, and all our work is based on having our analysts in the field, in the hotspots, in the places where the crisis is going on, and we've always collected data through different means.
Dr. Ogwell has to go, but keep on going. Yeah. Thanks, Dr.
Through
Ogwell.
qualitative means as well. The beauty, if I can use that word, of data or technology is that it can provide you with an extra lens. It can help expand your lens into sourcing the points of prevention and allowing you to sort of look early at what a crisis or potential indicators for crisis as well. So I'm already looking at weak signals. Data amplifies that as well. But that data is only useful if you think about sort of three things. And that's what we've been trying to think about when we built out this new system called EARTH. One is that if you're not looking at the right signals, then you're not going to be able to use data properly as well. So we've got the political analysis, but even our analysts, that sometimes you miss things about floods, about droughts. Sometimes you're not able to look at some of the flows and the traffic, and satellite enables that, data enables you that right as well. So using the right data provides you the right signal, and you can amplify your political lens, you can open the aperture of prevention by getting that as well. But also, tied to that, you need human intelligence, because data only takes you so far. If you don't use that data wisely, then it doesn't get you the results as well. And so, despite all the chatter out there that you might all be extinct from your jobs, human intelligence is still going to, the human eye is going to be important to also do the prevention as well. And then, and this is what we're pretty clear about at Crisis Group, as we're building out this new tracking system, these new signals as well, it's a so what question. It's about mapping, using the data to map out the right response. So that it's about how that data, how that technology better serves decision makers, analysts, people in government, businesses, and humanitarian actors thinking about how do I use these signals, how do I use this data to better put a spotlight on the crisis so that everybody has the right tools at the right time and in the smart way so that we can act early as well. And that, for me, is that's the strongest link, is that we can use all that information in the right way to get people to act wisely and in time as well. And data provides you time, but decision makers are the ones who eventually have to think about how to use that data in a wise way.
Thank you for that. And in our final moments, just because both of you know so much about international cooperation and multilateralism, and I'm struck by what you said, and I've heard it before, I think Madeleine Albright famously said, if there weren't a UN, we would have to build it, right? Well, here's the chance to rebuild it. So if you were starting from scratch, what's the first big change you would make right now for the UN?
Well, isn't that what we are doing now with this
what would you
discussions today? No, I think to coordinate and to work on this evidence-based approach, use the data, the knowledge that we have to make sure that we put together a system that delivers in each and every country and for each and every individual. Yeah.
I mean, I would say that old world of the Second World War has changed, and the victors of the Second World War can no longer shape the politics of today. They're not saying that you wish them away, but what is very clear, and that's why you're seeing this agitation by all different actors, is that you need a more equitable United Nations, one that is fair, one that is based on equality, and one where the table is no longer represented by just a few, this notion that might is right. But there are a number of countries now who are shaping facts on the ground, who are mediators in their region, but also doing it at a scale as well. So the global south, for lack of a better choice of word,
global majority, maybe.
The majority, the idea that they're no longer at the table is just, in this 21st century, I would say need to think about that. But I would just say one more thing about reform. I think less about reform, but more about the practical things you can do. So it's worth looking at the working methods. The idea that only the P5 hold the pen, that idea is no longer sort of sustainable. It's like partnering with the rest of the Security Council members to hold the pen. Just one example about how you think about reform in a very practical and meaningful way as well.
I think you can only go forward, I think Ryder said. So the spreadsheets of yesterday, they can't sort of be used anymore, so we have to sort of look forward and use what we know and the data to move this agenda.
Hard work begins this week. Yeah, it's been ongoing, right? Comfort, Arrow, and Ganyorid, thank you so much. And of course, thanks to Dr. Ogwell, who had to leave us just a couple minutes early. And thanks again to all the UN leaders who joined us earlier in the program. We've been coming to you live from inside the United Nations. This lovely studio audience in front of me and all the people watching at home. I'm Tony Maciulis. To follow more of GZERO Media's work and coverage of the 80th General Assembly, just head to gzeromedia.com. For all of us here, I want to thank you for watching and wish you all a great evening. Thank you.